The rain fell softly that evening, washing away the city's dust, but not its pain. Near a dark alley, a little girl around 10 sat beside a torn blanket. Underneath that blanket lay a smaller figure, still, pale, and cold. Her sister. The girl's name was Lila. Her clothes were soaked, her tiny hands shaking as she held a rusty tin can. People walked past, eyes fixed on their phones. Umbrellas raised high. Nobody stopped. "Please, sir. Please," Lila whispered to a man in a gray suit rushing by. "My sister's gone. She's cold. I just want to bury her." But he didn't even glance down. The city didn't have time for the cries of a street child. Across the street, a black luxury car stopped at a red light. Inside sat Richard Hale, a man known to everyone as the miracle millionaire, a widower, a business giant, and a man who hadn't smiled in 5 years, not since losing his wife and unborn child in an accident. He sat alone in the back seat, staring out the window as the rain painted blurry streaks down the glass. That's when he saw her, Lila, kneeling in the rain, shaking her sister's body and begging strangers for help. Something about her voice cut through the noise of the city. "Bury my sister, please. Someone! Please help me bury her." The words echoed in his chest like a memory, a cry from his own past. He ordered his driver to stop. "Wait, go back," Richard said firmly. The driver hesitated. "Sir, that's not a safe area. It's just a beggar child." Richard's voice grew cold. "I said go back." The car reversed, stopping right in front of the alley. Richard stepped out, the rain soaking his expensive coat instantly. Lila looked up, frightened at first, then hopeful. "Mister, please, I don't want food. I don't want money. I just want her buried. They won't take her in the hospital. They said she's just another street girl." Richard stared at the lifeless body under the blanket. Something twisted inside his heart. The little face, so still, reminded him of the daughter he never met. He knelt beside Lila. "What happened to her?" he asked quietly. "She was sick," Lila said, tears mixing with rain. "I begged for medicine. Nobody listened. She said she wasn't hungry, but she was just saving food for me. She just stopped breathing this morning." Richard swallowed hard, his throat tight. For a moment, the world around him disappeared. All he could hear was the child's trembling voice. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lila." "And your sister?" "Mia." "Mia," he repeated, the name cracking something deep inside him. His wife's name had been Mia, too. The rain grew heavier. Richard stood up and called his driver. "Get someone from St. Anne's Hospital here. And bring a blanket, now." Lila looked confused. "Why are you helping me?" He hesitated, then softly said, "Because I once lost someone, and no one helped me either." The driver returned with a thick white blanket. Richard bent down and gently covered Mia's small body. Lila's eyes filled with fresh tears. "She always wanted a soft blanket," she whispered. Richard didn't reply. He just stood there, letting the rain hide his tears. An hour later, at the hospital, the doctors confirmed what Lila already knew. Mia was gone. They offered to take the body to the city morgue, but Lila clung to her sister's hand and cried, "No, not there. She hated cold places. Please don't put her in a fridge." The nurse looked at Richard helplessly. Richard took a deep breath. "No morgue," he said. "I'll handle the burial." Everyone turned to him in shock. "Sir, that's not a good idea," the driver whispered. This could become messy. But Richard didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt something real. Pain, yes, but also purpose. He looked at Lila. "Do you trust me?" The little girl nodded slowly. "I don't know you, mister, but you're the only one who stopped." Richard smiled faintly. "Then I'll make sure your sister gets the goodbye she deserves." That night, Lila sat in the back seat of the luxury car, holding a small stuffed toy that one of the nurses had given her. The city lights flashed across her face as they drove toward the hills. Richard sat beside her, lost in thought. "Do you have anyone else, Lila?" he asked. "No, just Mia. We used to clean cars at the market." "I don't have anywhere to go now." Silence, the kind that hurts. He could have dropped her off at a shelter and walked away. That's what any rich man would do. But he couldn't. Something about her innocence, her pain, felt like a mirror to his own broken soul. Finally, The car stopped outside his mansion, a massive home that felt emptier than ever. Lila looked up, eyes wide. "You live here?" Richard nodded. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll bury Mia together." Her voice broke. "Thank you, mister. I'll never forget you." He forced a small smile. "My name's Richard." She whispered it softly, as if memorizing it. "Thank you, Mr. Richard." As she fell asleep on the couch that night, Richard stood by the window staring out at the rain. For the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. He whispered to himself, "Maybe she's my second chance." But little did he know, helping this street girl would uncover secrets that could destroy his past, his name, and everything he thought he knew about love and loss. Morning came quietly over the city. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like sorrow. Inside the Grand Hale mansion, Lila woke up to the soft sound of birds. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the white walls, the soft couch, and the folded blanket that had kept her warm all night. And she remembered. Her sister Mia was gone. She sat up, clutching the little stuffed toy the nurse had given her, and whispered, "Mia, you're not cold anymore. Are you?" Richard stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He smiled faintly when he saw her awake. "Good morning," he said softly. "You must be hungry." "I am," she admitted shyly. "But is it okay? I don't belong here." He walked closer and handed her the mug. "You belong where kindness lives," he said simply. "Drink up. We have a long day ahead." Later that morning, Richard made calls to the funeral home, to the city office, and to the chapel near the hills. Everyone was confused. Nobody had ever seen the city's richest man personally arranging a burial for a poor street girl. "Sir, you really want a private ceremony for her?" asked the funeral director hesitantly. "Yes," Richard said firmly. "Treat her with the same respect you'd give anyone from my family." The man hesitated again. "That will be costly, sir." Richard's eyes hardened. "I said that she's family." By noon, a small silver coffin lay in the center of the chapel, surrounded by white lilies. Lila stood there in an oversized dress the maid had found for her, holding a single daisy. She looked so small, so fragile, standing beside something so final. Richard watched her from the back pew, his heart heavy. Every tear that fell from her eyes seemed to echo inside him. When the priest asked if anyone wanted to say a few words, no one moved until Lila stepped forward. "My sister, she was the kindest person," she said in a trembling voice. "When I was hungry, she gave me her food. When it rained, she gave me her shirt. I told her one day I'd buy her a real bed. I never got to do that." She looked down, tears falling. "Thank you, Mr. Richard, for helping her sleep in one now." There wasn't a dry eye in the room, not even Richard's. After the ceremony, they walked to the hill behind the chapel where the grave had been prepared. The view stretched out over the city, tall buildings, busy streets, and the place where pain and wealth collided every day. Lila knelt beside the fresh grave, tracing her sister's name carved into the white stone, MIA. "Goodbye, Mia," she whispered. "I'll be okay now." Richard placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to go back out there, Lila. You can stay with me. At least for a while." She looked up, uncertain. "Why would you do that? I'm just a street girl." He smiled faintly. "You're not just anything. You reminded me that love still exists, even after loss." That evening, back at the mansion, Lila explored the giant hallways like they were part of a dream. A butler guided her through the rooms, showing her the kitchen, the garden, and the room that would now be hers. But one door caught her attention, a locked one at the end of the hall. "What's inside that room?" she asked. The butler looked uncomfortable. "No one goes in there. It's the master's private room." When Richard walked by later, she asked him the same thing. "That room," she said softly, "does it belong to your family?" Richard paused. His face darkened slightly. "It belonged to my wife," he said. "She passed away 5 years ago." "What happened to her?" Lila asked. He sighed, sitting down. "We were in a car accident. I survived. She didn't. And our daughter?" He stopped mid-sentence, eyes distant. "She was never born." Lila's eyes softened. "So, Mia reminded you of her?" Richard nodded slowly. "Yes, too much. As the days passed, the mansion began to feel less like a house and more like a home again. Lila filled it with laughter, questions, and the sound of life that had been missing for years. She helped in the kitchen, watered the plants, and sometimes just sat in the garden talking to Mia's spirit. But something strange began to happen. One night, as Richard was working late in his study, Lila walked in holding a small locket she had found near Mia's grave. "Look what I found," she said excitedly. "It has a picture inside." Richard took it and froze. Inside the locket was an old photo of a woman, his wife. He stared at it in disbelief. "Where did you find this?" "Near my sister's grave." It was buried in the dirt. He opened the back of the locket, his hands trembling. There were tiny engraved letters inside, R+M Saxaz forever. It was his wife's. He had buried that locket with her 5 years ago. Confusion turned into panic. How could this locket end up at a random child's grave? He rushed to his private room, the one he'd kept, locked for years, and opened a drawer. The photo album was still there. He flipped through it quickly until he found the picture he was looking for. His wife, holding a small baby at an orphanage opening ceremony. The nameplate in the background read, St. Hope Shelter. He stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, realization began to dawn. What if Lila wasn't just some random street girl? The next morning, he called the shelter. "Can you tell me about a girl named Lila and her sister Mia?" he asked. The old woman on the other end hesitated. "Oh, those two. Yes, I remember them. They came here years ago. Their mother dropped them off, said she couldn't afford to raise them anymore." Richard frowned. "Did she leave her name?" "Yes, it was written on the form. But we lost most of the records when the shelter burned down last year. I do remember one thing, though. The mother said the father was a rich man who didn't even know they existed." Richard's heart skipped a beat. He whispered, almost to himself, "No, that can't be." He hung up the phone, his mind spinning. Lila, could she possibly be his daughter? He looked toward the garden, where she was sitting with her stuffed toy, smiling at the butterflies. The way she smiled, the way she cared. Even the name Mia, it all connected. Tears filled his eyes. If this was true, fate hadn't just brought him to her. It had brought her home. That night, as he tucked her into bed, she looked up and said, "Mr. Richard, do you think my sister's happy now?" He nodded, voice trembling. "I think she's very proud of you, Lila." She smiled softly. "And I think she sent you to me." He froze, unable to speak. "Good night, Dad." She whispered, half asleep, the words slipping out unconsciously. Richard's breath caught. He didn't correct her. He just sat beside her, tears quietly falling, as he finally understood that life had given him back what it once took away. The next few days felt heavy for Richard. Every time he looked at Lila, his heart filled with both love and fear. Love for the little girl who had brought life back into his mansion, and fear that the truth might destroy everything again. He couldn't sleep. Each night he'd sit by his wife's old piano, staring at the locket and whispering, "Could she really be ours, Mary? Did you hide her from me?" The storm outside matched the storm in his heart. The next morning, Lila noticed his silence. "Mr. Richard, are you mad at me?" she asked softly while feeding the birds in the garden. He forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. I could never be mad at you." But deep down, he knew he needed to find out the truth, no matter how painful it was. That afternoon, he drove to St. Hope's shelter, the only place that might still hold the missing piece. The building was half burned, old papers scattered across the floor. A caretaker met him at the gate. "You're looking for the records, aren't you?" the man asked, recognizing his name. "Yes," Richard said. "Anything about two girls, Lila and Mia?" The man disappeared into a storage room and returned, minutes later with a half-burnt folder. "This was all that survived the fire," he said. Richard opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single page, torn, faded, but still readable. It said, "Mother's name, Mary Hale. Father, Richard Hale, unknown to child. Children, Lila Hale, age 1. Mia Hale, age 3. Richard's breath caught. The room spun. He wasn't imagining it. Lila was his daughter. The daughter his wife had secretly given away. Maybe out of fear, or guilt, or something he'd never understand. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he drove home. When he arrived, Lila ran to greet him. "You're back!" "Where did you go?" He knelt down, holding her tiny hands. "Lila, I found something today. Something important." She tilted her head, confused. "What is it?" He swallowed hard. "You're my daughter." Lila blinked. For a moment, she didn't speak, just stared at him. "That's not funny," she whispered. "It's true," he said softly. "Your mother and my wife, she was Mary. Hale, she left you at a shelter when things got bad. I never knew." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "So, you're my dad?" He nodded. "I should have been there for you, Lila. I can't change the past. But I promise I'll never let you be alone again." She threw her arms around him, sobbing. "I have a dad now," she whispered. "You always did," he said, holding her tight. That night, something magical happened in the mansion. For the first time in years, Richard opened the door to his late wife's room. He and Lila walked inside together. Dust floated. In the air, sunlight glowed through the curtains, and the piano stood quietly in the corner. "This is where your mom used to play," Richard said softly. "Can I learn?" Lila asked. "Of course," he smiled. He placed her small hands on the keys and guided her fingers. The first note echoed through the hall, soft, innocent, full of hope. And just like that, the house that once echoed with sorrow began to sing again. Weeks passed, and Lila's presence changed everything. The mansion staff adored her. She decorated the halls with drawings, baked cookies with the chef, and sometimes ran to Richard's study just to say, "Dad, I love you." He'd smile every time, feeling his wife's spirit in her words. But one day, as Lila was cleaning her sister's grave, a stranger appeared, a tall man in a black coat. "You're Lila, right?" he asked. "Yes," she replied carefully. "Do I know you?" The man knelt down beside the grave, eyes wet. "I knew your mother. I worked for her before she passed. She told me if I ever found you to give you this." He handed her a sealed letter. Lila ran home and gave it to Richard. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mary's. The letter read, "My dearest Richard, if you're reading this, it means you found our daughter. I'm sorry for what I did. I was weak. After losing the baby, the doctor said I could never have another child. When I found out about Lila and Mia, orphans abandoned by their mother, I couldn't ignore them. I planned to tell you, but before I could, the accident happened. If you ever meet them, please love them as your own, because in every way that matters, they already are. Love, Mary." Richard dropped the letter, tears blurring his vision. All this time, Mary had tried to save them. He looked at Lila, who was staring at him anxiously. "What did she say?" He smiled through his tears. "She said she was proud of you, and she wanted us to be a family." Lila threw herself into his arms again. "Then I guess we already are," she said. Months later, Lila started school. Her classmates often whispered, "That's the girl who used to live on the streets." But she didn't care. She'd smile and say, "Yeah, but now I live in a house full of love." Richard often picked her up after class. Sometimes they'd visit Mia's grave together. Lila would place fresh flowers there and whisper, "You can rest now, sis. We're okay." One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Richard placed his hand on her shoulder. "You know, Lila," he said, "you saved me." "How?" she asked, smiling. "I lost everything, my wife, my happiness. But you brought it all back." She looked up at him and said, "And you gave me everything I never had." They stood there in silence, side by side, a father and daughter who had found each other through tragedy, faith and fate. As the wind moved gently through the trees, Richard whispered, "Goodbye, Mary, I kept your promise." And for the first time, he swore he could feel her smiling back.